The call from the police came at 3 in the morning. My heart nearly stopped when they mentioned both my parents and my sister Ashley in the same breath. How had we gotten here? Just months ago, I was the dutiful daughter, the financial advisor who had faithfully paid my parents' mortgage for 5 years. Then came the announcement at Ashley's rehearsal dinner that left me speechless. My parents were gifting their home, the very home I had been saving from foreclosure, to my sister as a wedding present. What followed was a nightmare of betrayal that spiraled beyond anything I could have imagined. Growing up in Portland, my relationship with my parents had always been close. My childhood home was in a pleasant middle-class neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neighbors who knew each other by name. My father worked as a project manager for a construction company, and my mother was an elementary school administrator. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and they always emphasized the importance of education and financial responsibility. When I was 27 and finally establishing myself as a financial advisor after years of education and entry-level positions, my parents hit a rough patch. Dad lost his job at 58 when his company downsized, and Mom, who was 56, developed rheumatoid arthritis that made working full-time increasingly difficult. Their savings quickly dwindled as they tried to maintain their lifestyle while searching for new employment. One Sunday evening during our weekly family dinner, I found them at the kitchen table surrounded by past due notices. The mortgage statement showed they were 3 months behind. The threat of foreclosure loomed large. "We just need to get through until I find something new," Dad said, his voice lacking the confidence I was used to hearing. I remember the knot in my stomach. These were the people who had sacrificed to put me through college, who had taught me everything I knew about responsibility. Without hesitation, I offered to help. "Let me take over the mortgage payments until you get back on your feet," I said. The relief in their eyes was immediate, and Mom started to cry. "We can't ask you to do that, Elizabeth." "You didn't ask." "I'm offering," I assured them. "It's $1,800 a month. I can manage it." They protested at first, but reality won out. Dad was struggling to find work at his age, and Mom's medical bills were piling up. My younger sister Ashley was 24 and still in graduate school, so she wasn't in a position to help financially. We made what I thought was a clear arrangement. I would pay the mortgage to keep them secure in their home, and eventually the house would come to me. Not that I was in a hurry for that to happen, but it seemed like the logical conclusion since I was essentially investing in the property. We didn't put anything in writing because, well, they were my parents. I trusted them completely. For 5 years, I faithfully paid that mortgage. Every month, $1,800 transferred from my account to theirs, and they made the payment. I put off buying my own place, worked overtime to build my client base, and limited my vacations to weekend getaways. Meanwhile, I carefully invested what remaining money I could save. One investment I was particularly proud of was a small vacation cabin in the mountains, about 2 hours from Portland. It wasn't fancy, just 900 square feet, with a bedroom, bathroom, small kitchen, and a living area with a wood-burning stove. I rented it out on weekends and holidays to supplement my income. Ashley finished her master's degree in psychology and started working at a private practice in the city. She met James at a charity event, and they quickly became serious. James was the son of a wealthy real estate developer and worked in his father's business. They dated for just over a year before getting engaged. The wedding preparations were elaborate. James' family had connections and money, and they spared no expense. I was happy for Ashley, though. I sometimes felt a twinge of envy at how easily things seemed to come to her. Still, I focused on my own path and continued supporting our parents, who were now in their early 60s and still struggling financially. Dad had found part-time work as a consultant, and Mom had reduced her hours due to her health, but they were nowhere near their previous income level. The week of the wedding arrived, and family began flowing into town. At the rehearsal dinner held at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Willamette River, I sat at the family table feeling proud of how far we'd all come despite the challenges. The dinner was winding down when my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. "Jean and I have an announcement," he said, putting his arm around my mother. "As you all know, Ashley and James are starting their life together, and we wanted to give them something special." I smiled, expecting them to announce a honeymoon contribution or perhaps a sentimental family heirloom. "We have decided," Dad continued, his voice thick with emotion, "to give Ashley and James our home as a wedding gift." The room erupted in applause and congratulations. I sat frozen, my champagne glass halfway to my lips. Surely I had misheard. "The house has been in our family for 30 years, Mom added. "And now it will continue to be part of the next generation." Ashley squealed and jumped up to hug them. James looked genuinely surprised and touched. I felt dozens of eyes turn to me, expecting a similar reaction of joy. With tremendous effort, I placed my glass down, stood and forced a smile that felt like it might shatter my face. As soon as it was socially acceptable, I pulled my parents into a quiet corner of the restaurant. "What is happening?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "How can you give away the house? I've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. Dad patted my shoulder. "Now, Elizabeth, don't make a scene. We're so proud of how successful you've become. You have a great career, your cabin investment. Ashley and James are just starting out. They need this more than you do." "But we had an agreement," I said, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Mom shook her head. "Nothing formal, dear. You were helping family like family does. Ashley needs a solid start, and this will give it to her." "And what about all the money I've put into the house?" I asked, mentally calculating the nearly $108,000 I had paid over the years. "Consider it your contribution to your sister's happiness," Dad said with finality. "You wouldn't want to ruin her wedding with money talk, would you?" I felt sick. Not only had they made this decision without consulting me, but they were now manipulating me with guilt to prevent me from objecting. I returned to the table numb and disoriented. The next day, while picking up some last-minute items for the wedding, I ran into my mother's sister, Aunt Karen, who had always been straight with me. "Quite a surprise last night," she said, studying my face carefully. "You have no idea," I replied, feeling I could be honest with her. "Actually, I might. Your mom called me 6 months ago asking about refinancing. I thought you knew." My blood ran cold. "Refinancing what?" "The house. They took out equity. Didn't they tell you?" "They must have. If you're paying the mortgage." They hadn't told me anything. A quick check of my bank statements confirmed my worst fears. For the past 6 months, the transfer amount had increased to $2,200 a month. I had set up automatic payments and hadn't noticed the $400 increase because my income had also increased during that time. Not only had my parents given away the house I had been saving from foreclosure, but they had also refinanced it without telling me, and I had unknowingly been paying the higher amount. The betrayal cut deep. I somehow made it through Ashley's wedding day with a plastered smile and mechanical congratulations. Several relatives commented that I seemed off, but I blamed it on a headache and too much champagne at the rehearsal dinner. Inside, I was screaming. 3 days after the wedding, once Ashley and James had left for their 2-week honeymoon in Hawaii, I went to my parents' house for Sunday dinner as usual. This time, however, I was determined to have a rational conversation about what had happened. "I need to understand," I said after dinner, as we sat in the living room. "Why didn't you discuss this with me before announcing it publicly? And why didn't you tell me about the refinancing?" Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. "We knew you'd be sensitive about it. The refinancing was necessary for some expenses we had, and we didn't want to burden you with the details. But I had a right to know," I insisted. "I was paying the mortgage with the understanding that eventually this house would come to me." Mom leaned forward. "Elizabeth, family property should stay in the family. If Ashley hadn't married James, he might have bought them a house elsewhere. We wanted to make sure they stayed close by." "And what about me?" I asked. "I'm family too. I put my own life on hold to help you. I could have bought my own home instead of paying for yours. I worked overtime and limited my own expenses to make those payments. And we appreciate that," Mom said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But you're already successful. Ashley needs help starting her life." "What did you do with the money from the refinance?" I asked, suspecting I already knew the answer. They exchanged glances. Finally, Dad spoke. We had some debts to pay off, and Ashley's wedding was expensive. The wedding, I thought James' parents paid for most of it. They did, Mom acknowledged. But we wanted to contribute too. The rehearsal dinner, Ashley's dress, the honeymoon fund. It adds up. I sat back, stunned. So, you refinanced the house I was paying for to fund a lavish wedding for Ashley, then gave her the house as a gift. And you didn't think I deserved to know any of this? When you put it like that, it sounds bad, Dad said defensively. But family helps family. You would have helped anyway, if Wed asked. Maybe I would have. But I deserved the choice. And now I've paid $108,000 toward a house that you gave away without consulting me. Mom started to tear up her go-to response when confronted. We're still your parents, Elizabeth. We don't need your permission to do what we think is best for our family. I realized then that no matter what I said, they wouldn't understand how deeply they had betrayed me. They saw my financial support as an obligation, not a sacrifice. And now they had disposed of the house I had saved as if my contribution meant nothing. I need some space, I said, finally standing up. I can't keep doing Sunday dinners right now. I need time to process this. Don't be dramatic, Dad said dismissively. This is how family works. We all help each other. I left that night feeling hollowed out. Over the next 2 months, I limited my contact with my parents to brief text messages confirming they were okay. I couldn't bear to hear their voices or see them in person. The pain was too raw, and I was afraid of saying something in anger that I couldn't take back. Ashley and James returned from their honeymoon and began moving into the house. From social media posts, I could see they were already planning renovations. Mom texted me pictures of paint samples and new furniture as if nothing had happened between us. I responded with non-committal messages, unable to share in her excitement over the home I had preserved for years. Then on a Tuesday evening in October, my phone rang with my father's number. Thinking perhaps one of them was ill, I answered. Elizabeth, great news. Dad sounded more cheerful than I had heard him in years. We've been doing some thinking, and we've made some decisions. What kind of decisions? I asked cautiously. We're downsizing. Ashley and James want to completely renovate the house, and we realized we don't need all this stuff anymore. We're selling the cars and most of the furniture. That's good, I guess, I said, confused by his enthusiasm. So, you're finding an apartment? Well, that's the best part, Mom chimed in, apparently on speakerphone. We thought, why pay rent? When you have that lovely cabin in the mountains, we could move in there just for a year or two while we figure out our next steps. It would be perfect. I nearly dropped the phone. My cabin. You want to move into my vacation property? It's just sitting there most of the time anyway, Dad said. You rent it out occasionally, but we would be there taking care of it. It's a win-win. Actually, it's not sitting empty most of the time, I corrected him. I rent it almost every weekend and holiday. That's income I count on. And it's only 900 square feet, with 1 bedroom. We can make it work, Mom insisted. We're not as young as we used to be, but we're adaptable. And the mountain air would be good for my arthritis. I took a deep breath. That's not realistic. The cabin is remote. The nearest town is 30 minutes away. The roads are treacherous in winter, and you would be isolated from your doctors and friends. But we're family, Dad said, as if that explained everything. We helped you when you were growing up. Now it's your turn to help us. Ashley and James need the house to themselves, and we need somewhere to go. The entitlement in his voice struck me like a physical blow. After giving away the home I had paid for, they now expected me to give them my cabin as well. No, I said firmly. I can't do that. The cabin is too small, too remote, and I need the rental income. I can help you look for an apartment or senior community, but you can't move into my cabin. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mom's voice tight with anger. After everything we've done for you, We raised you, put you through college, supported you while you built your career, and now you won't help when we need it. I did help, I reminded her. For 5 years. I paid your mortgage. And you gave the house away. Without even discussing it with me. So this is punishment, Dad asked. You're getting back at us for giving Ashley the house. No, it's not punishment. It's a boundary. The cabin won't work for you for all the reasons I just explained. And after what happened with the house, I need some space and time. Your friends will be shocked to hear how you're treating us. Mom threatened. And what will the rest of the family think when they hear you're leaving us homeless? I'm not leaving you homeless. I'm offering to help you find appropriate housing. But the cabin is not an option. The call ended with them hanging up on me. I sat in my apartment shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The audacity of their request after what they had already done was staggering. True to their word, my parents began telling family members and their friends that I was refusing to help them in their time of need. My phone filled with messages from relatives asking why I was being so harsh. Only Aunt Karen called to get my side of the story, and she was appalled when I explained the full situation. They're manipulating you, she said bluntly. They always have. But this is beyond the pale. Her support meant a lot, but it didn't stop the tide of criticism from others who had only heard my parents' version of events. 3 days after the phone call, my parents showed up unannounced at my apartment, catching me just as I returned home from work. We need to talk face to face, Dad said when I opened the door. May we come in? I hesitated but stepped aside to let them enter. Mom looked around my 2-bedroom apartment with a critical eye. You have all this space just for yourself, she commented. We raised 2 children and not much more room than this. I refused to take the bait. What did you want to talk about? Dad sat down uninvited on my couch. We've been thinking about your concerns with the cabin. We understand it's small, but we can make it work. And regarding the income, we can pay you a small rent. Not what you get from vacationers, of course, but something reasonable for seniors on a fixed income. It's not just about the size or the money, I explained. The cabin is in a remote area. The winters are harsh. You would be isolated from everything and everyone you know. We can adapt, Mom insisted. People retire to the mountains all the time. Not to 900-square-foot cabins with no nearby amenities, I countered. Have you even looked at apartments? Apartments in Portland are too expensive, Dad complained. We can't afford anything decent on our Social Security. And my part-time work. What about the money from refinancing the house, I asked. That should have given you a significant cushion. They exchanged glances. That money is gone, Mom admitted. Medical bills, some repairs to the house before we gave it to Ashley, the wedding contributions. I took a deep breath to center myself. I understand you're in a difficult position, but the cabin is not a solution. It's my property, my investment, and my decision. I can help you look for affordable senior housing or apartments in the suburbs where costs are lower. But I need you to respect my boundaries on this. Boundaries, Dad scoffed. Since when do families have boundaries? We never said no when you needed something. Actually, you did, I reminded him. You said no to many things as parents should. You taught me to be independent and responsible. I'm just following what you taught me. This is different, Mom insisted. We're not asking for luxuries. We're asking for a roof over our heads, and I'm offering to help you find an appropriate one. Just not my cabin. The conversation circled this way for another hour. They tried guilt, manipulation, and even tears, but I held firm. Finally, they left with Dad delivering a parting shot. Wait until everyone hears about this. Your own parents left to fend for themselves while you hoard a second home. True to their word, the calls and messages increased over the next few days. Extended family members I rarely spoke with suddenly had opinions about my character and compassion. Even some of my childhood friends reached out, having heard from my parents about their heartless daughter. I began screening my calls and limited my social media usage. I went to work, came home, and tried to process the upheaval in my family relationships. A college friend who had gone through a similar family estrangement recommended her therapist, and I made an appointment desperate for an objective perspective. Dr. Tanner was in her 50s with a calm demeanor and direct approach that I appreciated. From what you've described, she said during our second session, you've been in a financially exploitative relationship with your parents for years. The house was just the most obvious manifestation. But they raised me, I said, voicing the guilt that had been plaguing me. Don't I owe them something for that? Parents choose to have children, she replied. Children don't choose to be born. Good parents raise their children to be independent adults, not retirement plans. Her words struck a chord. I had always been the responsible one. The one who stepped in during crises, who sacrificed for family harmony. But at 32, I was seeing for the first time how one-sided that relationship had become. A week after my parents' visit, I received a call from my cousin Mark, who lived near them. Just wanted to give you a heads up, he said. Aunt Jean and Uncle Bob are telling everyone you're trying to leave them homeless because you're jealous of Ashley and James. My stomach clenched. That's not true at all. I offered to help them find an apartment. I figured there was more to the story, Mark said. They claimed you threw them out of your apartment when they came to talk to you. That's absurd, I protested. We had a civil conversation. They left on their own when I wouldn't give them my cabin. Mark sighed. Look, I'm not taking sides. But you should know they're really working the sympathy angle hard. Even Ashley is getting involved now. Ashley how? She's been calling around to family saying you need to step up and help your parents since she's busy with the house renovations and her new marriage. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My sister, who had benefited enormously from my financial support of our parents, was now criticizing me for not doing more. Later that day, I received a text from Aunt Karen. Call me when you can. Important. I called her immediately. Elizabeth I was just at Ashley's house dropping off a housewarming gift, she said without preamble. Something doesn't add up. Your parents were there, and they were talking about James and Ashley wanting them out as soon as possible so the renovations can start. But the way they were discussing it, it didn't sound like Ashley and James are planning to live there. What do you mean? I asked. They were talking about contractors and timelines, and something about market value. It sounded like they might be planning to sell the house, not live in it. The revelation hit me like a truck. I thanked Aunt Karen and immediately called Ashley. To my surprise, she answered. What do you want, Elizabeth? She asked, her voice cool. I'm pretty busy with the renovations. Are you planning to live in the house or sell it? I asked directly. There was a pause, then a sigh. Look, the market is really hot right now. James' dad says we could make a significant profit if we update the house and sell quickly. It's just a smart business decision. So Mom and Dad gave you the house which I paid to save from foreclosure, and you're going to sell it for profit. I clarified, my voice shaking. It's our house now, Elizabeth. We can do what we want with it. And by the way, you really need to help Mom and Dad. They need somewhere to stay. And that cabin of yours is just sitting empty most of the time. I ended the call before I said something I would regret. The complete lack of appreciation or awareness from my sister was the final straw. I had been manipulated and used by my entire immediate family. With a newfound resolve, I called my parents. When my father answered, I was direct. I've found several apartment complexes for seniors that have units available in your price range. I'll text you the information. I've also spoken with Ashley and know about the plans to sell the house. Elizabeth, those apartments are not what we're looking for, he began. They're what you can afford, I interrupted. And they meet your needs. I'm not giving you my cabin, and I'm not supporting you financially anymore. You made decisions without consulting me that affected my investment in your house. Now you need to live with the consequences of those decisions. How dare you speak to us like that? My mother chimed in, apparently on speakerphone again. After everything we've done for you, I'm speaking to you as an adult who has been taken advantage of. I replied calmly. I paid your mortgage for 5 years. I didn't complain when you gave the house to Ashley without discussing it with me. But I'm drawing the line at giving you my vacation property too. Well, see what everyone thinks about your attitude, Dad threatened. Feel free to tell them whatever you want. I'm done worrying about it. I ended the call and blocked their numbers, needing a break from the constant emotional manipulation. I would help them find housing because it was the right thing to do, but I would no longer allow them to guilt me into giving more than I could responsibly give. The next day, I received calls from 5 different relatives criticizing my abandonment of my parents. I let them all go to voicemail. Then I got a call from an unknown number. Thinking it might be a client, I answered. "Is this Elizabeth Carter?" A formal male voice asked. "Yes, it is." "Who is this?" "This is Officer Reynolds with the Portland Police Department. I need to speak with you regarding your parents, Robert and Jean Carter." My heart raced as Officer Reynolds explained the situation. My father had been arrested for breaking into Ashley and James' house and causing property damage. He was currently being held at the downtown precinct, breaking in. "But they gave him the house," I said, confused. "According to the homeowners, your father no longer has permission to enter the property," the officer explained. "They state they asked him to remove his belongings by yesterday, and when he arrived today and found the locks changed, he broke a window to gain entry." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache forming. "Officer, that's my parents' former home. They recently gave it to my sister as a wedding gift. This is a family dispute, not a criminal matter. I'm afraid when property damage occurs, it becomes a police matter," he replied. "Your father is asking for you specifically. Will you be coming down to the station?" 20 minutes later, I was walking into the police station, still dressed in my work clothes, and trying to process this latest development. They led me to a small room where my father sat, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen him. "Elizabeth," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Thank goodness you're here." "What happened, Dad?" I asked, sitting across from him. His face crumpled. "They changed the locks. All our things. Your mother's, family, photos, your grandmother's, jewelry, my father's, watch. Everything we didn't take to storage was still in the house. Ashley and James said they were going to pack it all up for us. But when I went by this morning, I saw them putting boxes in the garage like trash. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of sympathy for my father. "So you broke in?" He nodded, looking ashamed. "I lost my temper. I broke a window and went in to get our things. Then I got angry about everything else. And I may have damaged some of the new fixtures they installed." The officer had told me he'd taken a sledgehammer to a newly installed kitchen island. The damage was estimated at several $1,000s. James' father called the police. Dad continued. "They arrested me in front of the neighbors. Your mother is beside herself." I sighed deeply. Despite everything, these were still my parents. Let me see what I can do. After speaking with the officers, I learned that Ashley and James were pressing charges for breaking and entering and property damage. I called James directly, which he surprisingly answered. "James, this is Elizabeth. I'm at the police station with my father. Your father destroyed $10,000 worth of custom cabinetry," he said without preamble. "We just had it installed yesterday. He was trying to retrieve family heirlooms and photos," I explained. "Things with sentimental value that can't be replaced. He should have called instead of breaking in." James replied coolly. "We would have arranged something. Would you have? Because according to him, you were packing their personal belongings in the garage to be discarded." There was a pause. "Those were old things that no one would want. We need to clear the house for the renovations." "Those old things are their memories," I said. "Look, what my father did was wrong. But pressing charges won't help anyone. Hez 63 years old, with no criminal record." After some negotiation, James agreed to drop the charges if I paid for the damages and ensured my father stayed away from the property. I agreed, adding yet another financial burden to the situation my family had created. I posted bail for my father and drove him to my apartment where my mother was waiting, having been dropped off by a neighbor. "Oh, Bob," she cried, embracing him. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he assured her, though he looked exhausted. "Elizabeth took care of everything." Mom turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for helping him. I don't know what we'd have done otherwise." "You can stay here tonight," I offered, still keeping my emotional distance. Tomorrow, we'll go to the storage unit, and then find you a place to stay. The next morning, we drove to the storage facility where my parents had placed most of their belongings when they left the house. Dad had rented the smallest unit available, and it was packed to the ceiling with haphazardly stacked furniture and boxes. We need to find the important documents, I said. Insurance papers, financial records, anything you need for daily living. We began sorting through boxes. In one unmarked container, I found a folder of financial documents. Thinking it might contain their insurance information, I opened it. Inside was a contract I had never seen before. It was an agreement between my parents and Ashley and James regarding the house. According to the document, Ashley and James would receive the house as a gift, but they would pay my parents $200,000, ostensibly the equity in the home after the recent refinance. I stared at the paper then at my father, who was sorting through another box. Dad, I said, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. What is this contract with Ashley and James? He looked up startled, then saw the paper in my hand. His face fell. You weren't supposed to see that. Obviously, I replied. $200,000. They paid you for the house that I saved from foreclosure. Mom hurried over. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you sold the house to Ashley and James while pretending it was a gift. All while I was still paying the mortgage. I said. What am I missing? They exchanged glances. And finally, Dad spoke. We needed money for retirement. The refinance helped, but it wasn't enough. Ashley and James wanted the house because of the neighborhood and the property value. It was a win-win. And where is this money now? I asked, already suspecting the answer. We had debts, Mom said vaguely, and we needed to set aside something for the future. So you received $200,000 for the house that I paid $108,000 to save, and you didn't think to mention this to me or offer me any of that money, I clarified. We thought you'd continue helping us anyway, Dad admitted. You've always been so responsible. And we figured, with the cabin and your good job, you didn't need the money like we did. The level of calculation and deception was staggering. My own parents had essentially stolen my investment and profited from it all, while manipulating me emotionally to continue supporting them. I need some air, I said, walking out of the storage unit. Outside, I leaned against my car, breathing deeply to calm myself. My phone rang, an unknown number again. Miss Carter. This is Deputy Wilson from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. We're calling about a property you own in the mountains near Pine Ridge. My blood ran cold. Yes, I have a cabin there. What about it? We're responding to a report of a break-in. The neighbors called when they noticed lights on in what they knew was a vacation property. When we arrived, we found two individuals inside who claim to be your parents. They say they have permission to be there, but the neighbors say the property is only used as a rental. I closed my eyes, disbelief washing over me. They do not have permission to be there. I'm the owner, and they are trespassing. Ma'am, they're claiming they're family and that there was a misunderstanding about when they could move in. There was no misunderstanding, I said firmly. I explicitly told them they could not stay in my cabin. I can drive up there immediately. That would be best, the deputy agreed. We can keep an eye on things until you arrive. I ended the call and went back into the storage unit, where my parents were still sorting through boxes. The police just called me. You broke into my cabin. They had the decency to look embarrassed, but not apologetic. We needed somewhere to go, Dad said defensively. Ashley and James wanted us out by yesterday, and we had nowhere else. So you broke into my property after I explicitly told you no. I was beyond anger, now entering a strange, calm clarity. I'll deal with you when I get back. Back from where? Mom asked. From my cabin, where I have to meet with the sheriff about your breaking and entering, I replied. Stay here. Don't leave my apartment. We're going to settle this once and for all when I return. The 2-hour drive to my cabin gave me time to think. How had my relationship with my parents deteriorated to this point? They had raised me to be honest and responsible. Yet they had lied to me repeatedly and acted with complete disregard for my boundaries. When I arrived at the cabin, a sheriff's vehicle was parked outside. Deputy Wilson, a tall man with a weathered face, greeted me. "Miss Carter, can you confirm this is your property?" I showed him my ID and property documents that I kept in the cabin. "Yes, this is my vacation home. I also rent it out through a management service. And these individuals do not have permission to be here." He gestured to my parents, who were sitting at my small kitchen table looking defiant. "Absolutely not. I explicitly told them they could not stay here." The deputy turned to my parents. "Sir, ma'am, the property owner has confirmed you do not have permission to be here. You'll need to gather your belongings and leave immediately." "Were her parents?" my mother protested. "We have nowhere else to go." "That's not the county's concern, ma'am," the deputy said firmly. "This is private property and you're trespassing. You can leave voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest." Dad stood up. "Well, leave. But Elizabeth, you need to think about what you're doing. We're family." I remained silent as they gathered the few items they had brought. The deputy noticed signs of forced entry at the back door. "Do you want to press charges?" he asked quietly. Part of me wanted to, if only to teach them a lesson about boundaries. But I shook my head. "Not at this time. But I would like it documented, in case this happens again." After my parents left with the deputy escorting them to ensure they actually went, I surveyed the damage. The back door frame was splintered where they'd forced it open. Inside, they had moved furniture, used dishes without washing them, and made themselves completely at home. My bedroom had been taken over their clothes in my dresser. In the bathroom, my toiletries had been pushed aside for theirs. The violation went beyond the physical break-in. They had completely disregarded my explicitly stated boundaries, believing their status as my parents gave them the right to take whatever they wanted from me. While checking for further damage, I noticed several items missing: a small television, some decorative pieces, and a silver serving tray that had been a gift from a client. Had they stolen from me as well? I called the sheriff's department to update the report. As I was securing the cabin before leaving, my phone rang. It was James' father, Richard. "Elizabeth, this is Richard Warner. We need to talk about your father and what he did to my son's home." "I paid for the damages," I said, not in the mood for another confrontation. "The matter is settled." "It's not about the money," Richard replied. "It's about your father orchestrating this whole situation." "What are you talking about?" "First he damages the property, then you come to the rescue. And now I hear he's broken into your cabin. This is clearly a pattern of manipulation to force you to take them in." I hadn't considered that my father's break-in at Ashley's might have been calculated rather than emotional. "Mr. Warner, one, assure you, I'm not encouraging any of this behavior. Well, my son and your sister are upset enough that they've filed a restraining order against your parents. And they're considering legal action regarding the house sale agreement." This was news to me. "What issue with the agreement?" "The contract stipulated the house would be transferred in good condition. Your father's vandalism violated those terms. James and Ashley want the $200,000 returned." So Ashley and James were suing my parents for the money back. The situation had spiraled completely out of control. After ending the call, I finished securing the cabin, adding additional locks, and making a mental note to install a security system. I wasn't taking any more chances. On the drive back to Portland, I tried to formulate a plan. My parents had nowhere to go, had spent the money from selling the house, had violated my boundaries repeatedly, and were now facing a lawsuit from Ashley and James. As angry as I was, I couldn't simply wash my hands of the situation. Despite everything, they were still my parents, and at their age, with my mother's health issues, they were vulnerable. When I returned to my apartment, I was surprised to find it empty. A note on the counter read, "Staying with friends. We'll call you when you're ready. To be reasonable. Mom and Dad." I sank onto my couch, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. Part of me was relieved they were gone, but another part worried about what they might do next. The next morning, I received a call from a social worker at Adult Protective Services. "Miss Carter, I'm calling regarding your parents, Robert and Jean Carter. They've been referred to our office due to concerns about elder abuse and housing instability. Elder abuse? I echoed, stunned. Who made that claim? I'm afraid I can't disclose that information. But the report suggests you've left your elderly parents homeless while refusing to allow them use of a vacant property you own. I realized immediately what had happened. My parents had reported me to make me look like the villain. That's absolutely false, I said firmly. My parents gave away their home, which I had been paying the mortgage on for 5 years. They then attempted to move into my vacation property without permission after I explicitly refused. They broke in and damaged the property. I have a police report documenting this. There was a pause on the line. I see. This sounds more complicated than the initial report indicated. Would you be willing to meet with me to discuss the situation in more detail? I agreed to a meeting the following day. Before hanging up, I asked, "Do you know where my parents are currently staying?" They're not answering my calls. They listed their address as a motel on Powell Boulevard, room 24. After ending the call, I did something I had been avoiding for weeks. I called my sister. "What do you want?" Ashley asked when she answered. "Did you know? Mom and Dad reported me for elder abuse because I wouldn't let them take over my cabin." There was a pause. What? For the first time since this whole mess began, Ashley sounded genuinely surprised. I explained the situation, including the break-in at my cabin and the call from Adult Protective Services. "That's insane," she said finally. "They told me you kicked them out of your apartment and refused to help them find housing." "That's not true at all," I replied. "They left my apartment while I was dealing with their break-in at my cabin. And I've offered repeatedly to help them find an appropriate place to live." There was a long silence. "Look, Elizabeth, I don't know what's going on with them lately. They were always dramatic. But this is different. James and I are getting calls from his parents, our friends, even our employers about the homeless elderly couple we're heartlessly evicting." "Wait, you're getting calls too?" I asked, surprised. "Constantly. They even showed up at James' office yesterday, causing a scene in front of his clients. That's why we filed the restraining order." For the first time, I felt a glimmer of sympathy for my sister. Perhaps she had been manipulated by our parents as well. "Ashley, did you know I was paying their mortgage for the past 5 years?" I asked. "They said you helped occasionally when they were short," she replied. "Not that you paid the whole thing." "I paid $108,000 to keep them from losing the house," I told her. "They never told you." "No," she admitted. "They made it sound like you helped out now and then. Not that you were covering everything." We talked for nearly an hour, comparing the stories our parents had told each of us. It became clear they had been playing us against each other, telling each of us different versions of events to extract maximum financial and emotional support. "So what do we do now?" Ashley asked finally. "First, we need to find them suitable housing they can afford. Then we need to set clear boundaries for the future." "Good luck with that," she replied. "They've never respected boundaries in their lives." I thought about Dr. Tanner's advice about financial exploitation. Maybe it's time we learn how to enforce boundaries, not just set them. The next morning, I met with Sarah Jenkins, the social worker from Adult Protective Services. I brought documentation of everything: my mortgage payments for my parents' house, the police report from the cabin break, and text messages showing I had offered to help them find housing. "This is quite a situation," Sarah said after reviewing everything. "From what you've shown me, it appears your parents may have made misleading statements when they filed their report. They have a pattern of manipulation," I explained. "They use guilt and family obligation to get what they want. And when that doesn't work, they escalate to more extreme measures." "Have you considered that they might need more help than just housing?" Sarah suggested gently. "Some of these behaviors, raising false reports, breaking into properties, the emotional manipulation, could indicate cognitive issues or mental health problems." I hadn't considered that possibility. My parents had always been manipulative, but the recent escalation did seem extreme even for them. "I can arrange for an evaluation," Sarah offered. "If there are underlying issues, there might be resources available to help them and to protect you." I agreed to the evaluation, though I doubted my parents would cooperate. After the meeting, I drove to the motel where they were staying. The manager confirmed they were in room 24 but said they had only paid through today. I knocked on the door, and my mother answered, looking surprised to see me. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said firmly. "May I come in?" The motel room was small and depressing, with 2 double beds and a musty smell. Dad was sitting on one of the beds watching television. "So you've finally come to your senses about the cabin?" he asked without greeting me. "No," I replied. "I'm here because you reported me for elder abuse, which we both know is false. And because you're about to be homeless again when your room payment expires today." Mom sat on the edge of the other bed. "We had nowhere else to go. You refused to help us." "That's not true and you know it," I said, maintaining my composure. "I've repeatedly offered to help you find appropriate housing. What I refused was to let you take over my vacation property after you gave away the house I paid for." "Always about money with you," Dad muttered. "Actually, it's about honesty and respect," I corrected him. "You lied to me about the mortgage. You lied about the refinancing. You lied about selling the house to Ashley and James for $200,000. And now you're lying to social services about me." They exchanged glances, but didn't deny anything. "Here's what we're going to do," I continued. "I'm going to help you find an apartment you can afford. I'm going to help you move your things from storage. But first, we're going to have an honest conversation about your finances." "Our finances are none of your business," Dad said defensively. "They became my business when you asked me to pay your mortgage, when you tried to take my cabin, and when you reported me to authorities," I countered. "I need to know what's really going on so I can help you appropriately." After much resistance, they finally admitted several troubling facts. The $200,000 from Ashley and James was indeed gone, but not just to debts and wedding expenses as they'd claimed. A significant portion had gone to gambling, primarily my father's online sports betting, which had become problematic over the past few years. My mother had known but enabled it, hoping he'd win enough to solve their financial problems. Additionally, they had credit card debt totaling nearly $50,000, most of which they had hidden from me while I was paying their mortgage. The refinance had been partly to cover some of these debts, which explained why they hadn't told me about the increased payment. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" I asked, more sad than angry now. "I would have helped you find financial counseling, gambling addiction support." "We were ashamed," Mom admitted. "And afraid you'd stop helping us if you knew." I spent the rest of the day helping them find an affordable apartment in a senior community in the suburbs. I paid the security deposit and first month's rent, made arrangements for their belongings to be moved from storage, and found resources for my father to address his gambling addiction. Before I left, I set clear expectations. "I'm helping you now because you're my parents and you're in crisis. But going forward, I need complete honesty from you. No more manipulation, no more lies. If you need help, ask directly instead of creating emergencies." They agreed, though I wasn't sure how long their compliance would last. I returned to my apartment emotionally drained, but relieved to have a plan in place. That evening, I received a call from the security company I had hired to install a system at my cabin. "Miss Carter, we installed the system as requested. But I thought you should know there appears to have been another attempt to enter the property." My heart sank. "What happened?" "The back window was broken, but it doesn't look like anyone got in. The neighbors reported seeing a car matching the description you gave us of your parents' vehicle earlier today." I thanked him for the information and immediately called the sheriff's department to file another report. Then I called my parents' new apartment. "Did you try to break into my cabin again today?" I asked when my father answered. "What?" "No, of course not," he said. But his voice had the slight tremor it always had when he was lying. "The security company and neighbors saw your car there, Dad. The sheriff's department is filing a report right now." "Elizabeth, you're being ridiculous. We were getting settled in our new apartment all day." I ended the call, not interested in more lies. Minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Ashley. "Your cabin isn't the only property they've tried to access," she said without preamble. "They showed up at our house again today. James' dad called the police." "They're spiraling," I said, concern replacing my anger. I think we need to consider what the social worker suggested, getting them evaluated for cognitive or mental health issues. I agree, Ashley replied. This isn't normal even for them. We agreed to meet the next day to discuss a plan. For the first time in months, I felt like my sister and I were on the same side again. When I arrived at the coffee shop where we'd arranged to meet, I was surprised to find not just Ashley but James and his father Richard as well. We thought it was important for all of us to be here, Ashley explained. Richard got straight to the point. Your parents' behavior has gone beyond family drama. They're harassing my son and daughter-in-law. They've attempted to break into multiple properties, and they've filed false reports with authorities. I understand your concerns, I said carefully. I'm working with Adult Protective Services to get them evaluated. That may not be enough, Richard replied. We've spoken with our attorney, and he recommends pursuing a restraining order against them for you as well, Elizabeth. Their pattern of behavior suggests they may escalate further. A restraining order against my own parents, I asked, though after everything that had happened it didn't seem as extreme as it once would have. James spoke up. We also need to discuss the house situation. The contract your parents signed included clauses about the condition of the property and their behavior after the sale. Their actions have violated those terms. What are you saying? I asked. We're pursuing legal action to have the $200,000 returned, Richard stated. Your parents committed fraud by taking the money and then violating the terms of the agreement. But they don't have the money anymore, I pointed out. And they're elderly with health issues and limited income. That's unfortunate, Richard said. But actions have consequences. The contract is clear. I looked at Ashley, who avoided my eyes. And you're okay with this? They lied to everyone, she said quietly. They manipulated us all. And now they're becoming dangerous with these break-in attempts. I couldn't argue with that assessment. So what happens now? Our attorney will file the lawsuit next week, Richard explained. We wanted to give you advance notice, since it will likely affect you as well. As I drove home from the meeting, my phone rang. It was the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department again. Miss Carter, I'm afraid we've had to arrest your parents, Deputy Wilson said. They broke into your cabin again, and this time they refused to leave. They claimed the property is rightfully theirs because you've abandoned them. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. I'm on my way. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings, court appearances, and difficult decisions. After my parents' second break-in at my cabin, I reluctantly agreed to a restraining order against them, as Richard had suggested. It was one of the hardest decisions of my life, but their behavior had become unpredictable and potentially dangerous. The evaluations arranged by Adult Protective Services revealed troubling results. My father was diagnosed with early signs of frontotemporal dementia, which explained some of his impulsivity and poor decision-making. My mother was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and dependent personality traits that had led her to enable his behavior rather than seek help. With these diagnoses, I hired an elder law attorney to help navigate the complex situation. We worked with APS to find appropriate care and housing for my parents, taking into account my father's declining cognitive abilities and my mother's health issues. The lawsuit from Ashley and James complicated matters further. If successful, it would leave my parents with significant debt on top of what they already owed. After consulting with my attorney, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I offered to buy the family home from Ashley and James at fair market value. Why would you do that after everything that's happened? Ashley asked when I proposed the idea. Because it's the cleanest solution, I explained. You and James get your money without having to sue our parents. Our parents can pay off their debts and have something left for their care. And I get something tangible for all the money I've already invested in the property. Richard was skeptical. The market value is considerably more than the $200,000 they paid your parents. I'm aware of that, I replied. But I'm not offering to match what developers might pay after renovations. I'm offering fair market value, in as-is condition. After negotiations, they accepted my offer. Using my savings and a mortgage on favorable terms that I qualified for as a financial advisor, I purchased the family home. Ashley and James received enough to cover the money they'd paid my parents, plus compensation for the damage, and they dropped their lawsuit. For my parents, I established a trust with the remaining funds from the sale, with strict controls on how the money could be used. It would cover their housing in an assisted living facility that could provide the level of care they both needed with a modest monthly allowance for personal expenses. "You don't trust us to manage our own money?" Dad asked when I explained the arrangement. "Recent history has shown that neither of you make sound financial decisions," I replied gently. "This way your housing and care are secure regardless of what happens." It wasn't the retirement they had envisioned, but it was stable and appropriate for their needs. The trust was structured to prevent either of them from accessing the principal, which protected them from further gambling losses or impulsive spending. As for the family home, I decided not to move in. Too many difficult memories were attached to it now. Instead, I reached out to a local nonprofit that helped young adults aging out of foster care transition to independent living. "I'd like to donate the house to your program," I told the director during our meeting. "It could provide transitional housing for several young adults at once, with some renovations." The director's eyes widened. "That's an extremely generous offer. May I ask what prompted this?" I thought about my own journey. I know what it's like to support others at the expense of your own stability. These young adults deserve a chance to build their lives without that burden. The legal transfer took time, but 6 months after the whole ordeal began, I stood in front of the family home as a van of young adults pulled up to see their new transitional housing. The nonprofit had renovated the space into 4 separate units with a common area and teaching kitchen where residents would learn life skills while working or attending school. "This is really ours to live in?" one young woman asked, disbelief in her voice. "Yes," I replied with a smile. "It's yours for as long as you need it to get established." I visited my parents weekly at their new assisted living facility. Our relationship was different now. Strained, but slowly healing. My father's condition continued to progress, making it clear that the legal and financial protections I'd put in place had been necessary. My mother was attending therapy and beginning to develop interests and friendships independent of my father. Ashley and I had cautiously rebuilt our relationship as well. She and James had bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood and were expecting their first child. "I never thanked you properly," she said during one of our lunch meetings, "for finding a solution that worked for everyone, even after how badly we all treated you." "We all did the best we could with a difficult situation," I replied, having gained perspective with time and distance. And I learned some valuable lessons about boundaries and standing up for myself. One cool evening in autumn, I sat on the deck of my repaired and secured mountain cabin, watching the sunset over the trees. I'd come up for the weekend to relax and reflect on the tumultuous year behind me. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the young women living in the transition house. "Got the job starting Monday at the accounting firm. Thank you for everything." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The financial loss had been significant. My savings depleted a new mortgage to manage, but it gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could face betrayal and heartbreak, stand firm in my boundaries, and still find a compassionate solution. The experience had taught me that family isn't about obligation or financial transactions. It's about mutual respect, honesty, and supporting each other's independence, rather than creating unhealthy dependencies. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set clear boundaries even when it hurts. It also learned that generosity is most meaningful when it's given freely, not extracted through manipulation or guilt. The joy I felt in helping the foster youth transition program came from knowing it was my choice, freely made from a place of strength rather than obligation. As the last light faded from the sky, I made a promise to myself. I would continue to help others, but never again at the cost of my own well-being. I would give from abundance, not sacrifice. And I would surround myself with people who respected my boundaries as much as they appreciated my generosity. The painful journey had led me to a place of unexpected peace and purpose. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. What would you do if you were in my position? Would you have handled things differently with my parents or sister? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect your generosity? Comment below with your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if my story resonated with you. Thank you for listening, and I hope my experience helps anyone facing similar family challenges find the courage to stand up for themselves while still finding compassionate solutions.